The gathering storm. The Galactic Council room was buzzing with uneasy murmurs. Representatives from every corner of the galaxy had gathered around the massive oval-shaped table, each species more concerned than ever before. The problem at hand was one that couldn't be ignored. A new, powerful enemy had emerged, one that threatened to tear apart the peaceful alliances that had taken centuries to build. The council members, from the insectoid crash to the massive Trogans, were all uneasy. The enemy was fast, brutal, and relentless, and they were growing in strength. But despite the severity of the threat, one species was notably absent from the discussion: the humans. Counselor Jack Star, a towering alien with emerald green skin, spoke first. His deep voice filled the chamber. "Where are the humans? They've always been part of the discussions when it came to matters of war. Why have they not joined us this time?" A few other members muttered in agreement. Humans, though relatively new to the galactic stage, had built a reputation for being powerful warriors when needed. Their ability to strategize, to fight, and to hold their ground in the harshest conditions was legendary. The Dithworlders, as they were sometimes called, were known for their resilience. Yet here they were, absent when the galaxy needed them most. Counselor Zarin, a tall, silver-furred species known for their sharp intellect, tapped their fingers together, a sign of concern. "I sent them countless messages, but there's no response. It's unlike them to ignore such a matter. The humans have always shown up when a war is brewing." The room fell silent. The gravity of the situation was clear, but the humans' absence weighed on everyone's minds. It was as if something far more serious than the enemy was at play. Jack Star shifted uneasily in his seat. "I don't trust it," he muttered. "They have always been quick to take action when we are threatened. Why are they hiding now?" A deep voice suddenly boomed from the far end of the room, interrupting the murmur of confusion. Counselor Orak, a hulking figure with 4 muscular arms, stood up, his voice booming through the room. "Perhaps it's not about fear. Perhaps they know something we don't." The room grew even quieter at his words. Orak was known for his bold statements, but this one carried weight. If the humans knew something, it could change everything. Zarin turned to Orak. "What do you mean? The humans are among the strongest of us. Surely, they can see the threat and join us in our efforts to defend the galaxy." Orak's face remained serious, his 4 eyes fixed on the holographic map of the galaxy that hovered above the table. "You underestimate the humans. They have more knowledge than any of us realize. They don't just fight because they can. They fight because they have to. But they're not afraid of this enemy. No, they're afraid of something else." Jack Star leaned forward, his interest piqued. What could they possibly be afraid of? "We are dealing with an enemy that could wipe out our entire alliance." Orak turned to face the council, his 4 eyes narrowing. "I don't know what it is yet, but I do know this. The humans don't fight unless there's something they can't avoid. They know the true cost of war, more than any of us. And it's why, in times like this, they choose to stay silent." The room fell into an uneasy silence. For the first time, doubt crept into the hearts of the counselors. What was it that the humans knew that they did not? Why had the Dithworlders, who had been at the forefront of many battles, now chosen to stand aside? Zarin looked around the table at the other council members, but they all shared the same sense of unease. They were all deeply puzzled. The humans had a history of acting decisively when necessary, but they were not acting now. What had changed? What could possibly be more important than the survival of the galaxy? Counselor Korvuk, a member of a race known for their fierce loyalty and strength, spoke up. "The humans may have seen something terrible. Perhaps that is why they choose to remain distant. But we need them. Without their support, this war could destroy us all." Orak gave a grim nod. "You're right. But if they're not coming, it's because they have their reasons. And I fear those reasons are not what we think." Jack Star slammed his fist on the table, a rare display of frustration. "What are we supposed to do then? Wait for them to decide? We need to act now. This threat is growing." I agree, Zarin said, but if we act without the humans, we might make the same mistake as others have before us. Perhaps we need to find out why they are avoiding this war. We need to understand what they know. The council was in turmoil, uncertain of what to do next. One thing was clear: the humans had become a mystery, and whatever that mystery was, it could hold the key to the survival of everyone in the galaxy. As the meeting continued, it became clear that the questions surrounding the humans were only just beginning. What had caused them to withdraw from the fight? And more importantly, what did they know about war that the rest of the galaxy had yet to discover? The gathering storm was just beginning, and the answers would change everything. The truth behind the silence. The tension in the Galactic Council chamber was palpable. As the representatives from various species continued to debate, a sense of urgency had begun to take root. The absence of the humans was no longer just an anomaly. It was a critical issue. The once harmonious alliance, so used to having humans at the forefront of galactic defense, now faced the haunting possibility that their greatest ally was not coming to help. Councillor Zarin, who had been silently watching the unfolding conversation, finally spoke again, his voice cool and measured. If the humans are not responding to our calls, it is because they've already made up their minds. We must understand why. Perhaps in their silence, they've already revealed the most important thing of all. Korvac, ever the loyalist, scoffed at Zarin's words. What do you mean? The humans are not known to hide in the face of danger. Why would they shy away now? Zarin's eyes narrowed. Humans are not afraid of war. They fear something far worse. The room went silent at Zarin's cryptic statement. The councillors exchanged uneasy glances, unsure of what to make of his words. They all knew the humans' reputation: bold, fearless, and unmatched in battle. Yet here they were, avoiding a conflict that could wipe out their galaxy. It made no sense. Councillor Orak, with his massive form leaning over the table, broke the silence. Zarin, speak plainly. What do you believe is behind this? Zarin paused for a moment, considering his words. The humans are not avoiding war because they cannot win it. They are avoiding it because they know the true cost. They understand what war does to their people, what it does to a soul. No one else in this room has experienced war in the way they have. Jaxfar, who had been quiet up until that point, finally stood. What are you suggesting? That the humans are so damaged by war that they cannot face another one. Zarin looked directly at Jaxfar, his tone serious. I'm suggesting that humans are haunted by the scars of wars long past. Their reluctance to fight may not be a weakness. It may be a strength. The rest of us are still too naive to understand. But the humans, they've seen the depths of destruction, and they understand that peace must sometimes come at a great cost. Korvac snorted. So they've decided to sit this one out, to let others fight while they hide in the shadows. Zarin shook his head. It's not that simple. The humans are not hiding. They are preparing. They have a greater awareness of the consequences of conflict, and they fear that the galaxy is on the brink of repeating its darkest moments. They will not rush into battle without knowing the full extent of the damage it will cause. They've been to the edge before. They've seen the horrors of war that others can't even imagine. The council fell into an uncomfortable silence. The reality of what Zarin had said hung heavy in the air. While the rest of the galaxy was ready to charge into battle, the humans were taking a different path, one that was defined by caution and deep reflection. Suddenly, a hologram flickered to life in the center of the room. The councillors all turned toward it. It was a communication from the humans, finally. The hologram shimmered for a moment, and then the familiar face of General Caitlin Walker appeared. She was a human, strong and confident, her face etched with years of experience in both diplomacy and combat. Council, General Walker began, her voice calm but firm. We have heard your concerns, and we know that you are questioning our absence from this gathering. But we are not absent because we are afraid. We are absent because we are not ready to make the same mistakes again. There was a collective intake of breath from the council. They had expected a message, perhaps an apology, perhaps an excuse, but they had not expected such a blunt statement. The war you are preparing for, General Walker continued, is not the war you think it is. You believe that it is a battle of strength and might, but the humans know better. We've seen wars that have torn worlds apart, and we will not be part of another unless we are certain we understand what we are facing. We are gathering information, preparing for a different kind of fight. And when the time comes, we will stand beside you. But only when we are certain. The hologram flickered and went silent. The room was still, the counselors reeling from what they had just heard. It was clear now that the humans were not avoiding the fight. They were biding their time. But the question remained, what exactly were they preparing for? Jack Starr was the first to speak, his voice low and thoughtful. They believe they have a deeper understanding of this enemy, don't they? Orak nodded slowly. It seems that way. But what could they know that we don't? Zarin's eyes glittered with realization. Perhaps they have seen the pattern. Perhaps they know that the war we are facing is not simply a battle for dominance. It is a fight for survival, and they are choosing their approach carefully, because they understand that one wrong move could cost us everything. Korvac clenched his fists. We must not delay. If the humans are not with us, we stand at risk of being too slow. This war is already here. Waiting too long might make it impossible to win. Zarin shook his head. The humans know something we don't. And perhaps that knowledge is the key to ensuring we win, not just this battle, but all the battles to come. The council fell silent once again, but now there was a shared understanding. The humans were not avoiding war out of fear. They were choosing to take a different path, one that would give them the best chance of survival. The gathering storm had just begun, and the answers would soon become clearer. But one thing was certain. The humans were not going to let the galaxy fall without knowing exactly what they were fighting for, the hidden knowledge. The Galactic Council was in disarray. For the first time in many years, there was uncertainty within the ranks. The humans had always been a reliable ally, their strength and determination a constant presence in any conflict. Now their absence was a glaring absence in the debate. Their message, however, had left everyone stunned. They weren't afraid of war. They were preparing for something far worse. But what did they know that the rest of the galaxy didn't? Counselor Zarin paced around the room, his mind racing. He had always admired the humans for their fierce determination, their no-nonsense approach to any challenge. But now, their reluctance to fight had shifted everything. What was it that they feared more than war itself? He wasn't sure, but he suspected it had something to do with the ancient history of their species. Meanwhile, the other counselors exchanged heated words. Some were angry, accusing the humans of cowardice. Others were curious, wondering what it was they were hiding. The sense of unease grew with each passing second. At the back of the room, a small, unassuming figure stood, silently observing the chaos unfolding around him. It was Ambassador Rylos, a representative from one of the oldest and most secretive species in the galaxy, the Rylor. His race was known for its vast knowledge of ancient history and its ability to see things that others could not. The Rylor had always been quiet in the council meetings, preferring to observe and listen rather than speak. But now he felt the time had come to share what he knew. Rylos stepped forward, his voice calm but cutting through the rising noise. Perhaps we should stop focusing on the humans' absence and look at what they've said. They are not afraid of war. They are afraid of something else, something older. I believe they know more about the true nature of this conflict than we do. The room fell silent. All eyes turned to Rylos. The Rylor were enigmatic and secretive, but their insights were often profound. If anyone could shed light on the humans' behavior, it was him. Speak plainly, Ambassador, Counselor Orak urged, his voice a mixture of frustration and curiosity. Rylos nodded and began his explanation. The humans' reluctance to fight is not a sign of weakness. It is a sign of knowledge, a knowledge that we all lack. They have seen the end of civilizations before. They have lived through conflicts that have torn their worlds apart. The humans have a history of survival, a history of victory against impossible odds. But what they have learned from that history is what sets them apart. He paused, allowing his words to sink in. The council members listened intently, hanging on every word. The humans know that war, as we see it, is only the beginning. They understand that true destruction doesn't come from the battles fought. It comes from the aftermath. It's the long-term consequences of war, the erosion of everything that makes a civilization strong, the destruction of culture, the loss of hope, the crushing weight of grief. The humans have witnessed this firsthand. They've seen the rise and fall of empires, and they know the price of war is not worth paying unless there's no other choice. Councillor Zarin spoke, his voice quieter than usual. You're saying that the humans have seen the consequences of war in ways that we haven't. Rylos nodded. Precisely. And this is why they hesitate. They know that this enemy we face is not just a threat to our military strength. It is a threat to everything we stand for. The humans are not afraid of war because they can't win it. They are afraid of what comes after, and they believe we are not prepared for that. The room was silent again as the weight of Rylos' words settled in. The council members exchanged uneasy glances, their minds working to process what they had just heard. Could it be true? Could the humans have such a deep understanding of the consequences of war? And if so, how could they possibly be the only ones prepared for it? Councillor Orak was the first to break the silence. But what are we supposed to do? We've been preparing for this war for months, and now we're told that we are not prepared for the aftermath. Rylos' gaze hardened. You must learn to see the bigger picture. It's not enough to simply fight the enemy. You must understand what you're fighting for, and what will happen when the fight is over. War does not end when the last battle is fought. It ends when a civilization can rebuild itself, and the humans know how to rebuild. They've done it before. Zarin's voice was steady, but his words held a sense of urgency. So what you're saying is that we are not only facing an enemy, but the consequences of our actions. The humans understand that the galaxy is not ready for what happens after the war. Rylos nodded. Exactly. The humans have faced these challenges before. They've rebuilt from the ashes of their own past, and now they see that same pattern emerging again. They are not retreating from this conflict. They are preparing for what comes after. They know that if we fail to prepare for the consequences, we will lose everything. And they are not willing to let that happen again. The council was quiet once more, but this time, the silence was filled with understanding. The humans were not retreating out of fear. They were planning for something much larger, something the rest of the galaxy had failed to consider. As the council continued to digest Rylos' words, the message was clear. The humans were not just fighting for survival. They were fighting to ensure the galaxy's future. And the galaxy needed to wake up to the reality of what lay ahead. The battle was far from over, but the true challenge would begin once the war was won. The first blow. The Galactic Council sat in stunned silence, processing the weight of Rylos' words. No one had truly considered the aftermath of war. The possibility that the battle could leave a lasting scar on their civilization was almost too daunting to grasp. Yet, in the face of this new revelation, there was only one thing left to do: prepare for the war itself. The enemy was growing stronger by the day. They were relentless, their ships appearing in more and more star systems, attacking without warning, leaving destruction in their wake. The galaxy was on the brink of collapse, and the leaders of every species in the council knew that the first step was to face the threat head-on. But what would happen after? No one had an answer. And the humans, as always, were silent, absent from the battle lines. Their message, cryptic and ominous, echoed in the council members' minds. We need to act now, Councillor Orak declared, his voice hard. We cannot wait any longer. Our fleets are ready, and we must strike before they gain any more ground." But even as he spoke, doubt lingered in the air. It wasn't fear of the enemy that troubled the council. It was the fear of what would happen when the enemy was gone. What would remain? Could the galaxy rebuild, or would the consequences of war be too great to overcome? As if in answer to the growing unease, a message arrived from the humans. It was brief, simple, and chilling. "We're not coming." The message wasn't unexpected, but its implications were far-reaching. The humans were refusing to join the fight. The council had hoped that they would come to their senses, that they would join the other species in the galaxy's most desperate battle. But the humans were not afraid. They were not unwilling to fight. They were unwilling to fight without knowing the true cost. The council members were torn. Many argued that humanity's strength was needed to win the war, that they could not afford to fight this battle alone. Others, however, understood what the humans were saying. The battle itself was only part of the equation. The true war, the war that would shape the future of the galaxy, was the one that would come after the enemy was defeated. "This is madness," Counselor Zarin muttered, frustration building in his voice. "The humans are giving up on us. If we lose this war, we lose everything. They're making a mistake." But Rylos, who had remained silent during the exchange, spoke up again. "It is not the humans who are making a mistake. It is the rest of you who fail to understand. The victory we seek will come at a terrible cost, and the humans are simply preparing for what comes after. They know that war is not the answer. It's just the beginning of a much larger problem." Counselor Orak clenched his fists. "So what do we do? Stand by and wait for the humans to save us after we've destroyed everything we've built?" "No," Rylos replied, his tone firm. "You must learn from them. You must understand that the victory will not come from the might of your fleets, but from the strength of your societies. If you do not prepare for what happens after the war, if you do not learn from the mistakes of the past, you will be lost. The galaxy will be lost." The words hit the council members like a physical blow. The magnitude of what they were facing became clear. The war was not just about fighting an enemy. It was about rebuilding everything that would be destroyed along the way. The cost of war wasn't just the lives lost in battle. It was the lives lost after the battle was over, the lives that could never be restored. As Rylos' words echoed in the room, the council members began to feel the weight of their decisions pressing down on them. The war was no longer just a military conflict. It was a moral and existential struggle. It was about survival in a way that they had never considered before. It was about preserving what made them who they were, about ensuring that the future of the galaxy would not be reduced to ashes. Outside, the first wave of enemy ships arrived, their presence shaking the very stars around them. The council was out of time. The battle had begun, and they had no choice but to face it. But even as they prepared for the coming storm, the real question remained: could they rebuild after the war? Would they be able to survive the devastation that would come? And if so, at what cost? The council knew that the fate of the galaxy was uncertain. The humans had been right all along. They had seen the true nature of the war, and now it was too late to stop the tide of destruction. All they could do now was face the consequences of their actions and hope they would have a future to rebuild. The war begins. The war that the Galactic Council had dreaded was no longer just a possibility. It was a brutal, undeniable reality. The first wave of enemy ships descended like a swarm of locusts, their dark silhouettes blotting out the stars as they moved toward the heart of the galaxy. The force was overwhelming, and the Council had no choice but to respond, throwing everything they had at the approaching threat. But as the battle raged, an unsettling question lingered in every mind. How much would be left when the fighting was over? The galaxy's defense forces were scrambling, their fleets barely holding the line. The enemy ships were relentless, each attack more vicious than the last. The once vibrant systems of the galaxy were turning into war zones, with entire planets falling to the merciless onslaught. Civilizations that had once thrived were now reduced to rubble, and still, the war seemed far from over. In the midst of the chaos, Rylos and the council members found themselves facing the uncomfortable truth that they had ignored. The military might of their fleets, their advanced technology, and their strategies were all meaningless in the face of the aftermath. Even if they defeated the enemy, the cost would be catastrophic. Entire sectors of the galaxy were in ruins, and with each battle, the fabric of their civilizations was being torn apart. As the war continued, more messages from the humans came through. The Council had expected to hear a plea for help, or perhaps a call for an alliance. But instead, the humans simply reaffirmed their position. "We are still watching," the message read. "We won't join the fight. Not until you understand." The Council had grown impatient with the human silence, but Rylos was beginning to understand. The humans weren't refusing to help because they didn't care. They were refusing because they knew what the others had yet to learn. The fight wasn't over until the war was over, and no one had prepared for what came after. In the human silence, there was wisdom, a wisdom that the galaxy had ignored for too long. Back on the front lines, the battle raged with no sign of slowing down. The enemy forces were relentless, pushing through every defense that the Council's fleets put up. Whole planets were falling, one by one, with the once prosperous worlds now reduced to ash. The destruction was unimaginable. Planets that had housed millions of life forms, entire ecosystems, were now nothing more than memory. Rylos knew that the worst was yet to come. Victory could still be achieved, but it would come at a price far greater than anyone could have anticipated. The fighting had begun, but the real struggle was going to be after the war ended. The humans had understood something that the Council had not, that victory in war didn't guarantee survival. The destruction they were causing in the name of defense would take centuries to recover from, if not longer. And as each day passed, the future of the galaxy grew dimmer. On the battlefield, the once united alliance of species was beginning to fracture. Each race, focused on its own survival, had started to make reckless decisions in the heat of battle. Alliances were tested, and the costs of war were becoming all too clear. What would happen if they succeeded in defeating the enemy? Would they even recognize their homeworlds? Would their civilizations remain intact? Rylos saw the fear in the eyes of the Council members. They had fought the enemy with everything they had, but now they were fighting themselves. The destruction was not just a result of the enemy. It was a byproduct of their own choices. The war was breaking them, and they had no plan for what came next. The human message echoed in his mind, louder than ever. "We won't join the fight. Not until you understand." The Council was running out of time. The enemy was pushing forward, relentless and unyielding. But as the battle raged on, Rylos could see the glimmer of truth in the humans' refusal to join. The real question was never about who would win the war. It was about what would remain after. As the battle reached its peak, Rylos finally spoke, his voice shaking with the weight of the truth they all knew but had been too afraid to confront. "The war is not the fight that will define us," he said, his words cutting through the chaos like a blade. "The war is just the beginning. The real battle is what comes after." The Council members looked at him, their faces drawn and pale. They had fought for the galaxy, but now it seemed like they had lost everything. The cost of war was far greater than they had ever imagined. And still, the humans stayed silent. They had known all along. They had known that the galaxy had to learn this painful truth. Only once they understood the consequences of war could they hope to rebuild. The fighting was relentless. On every front, the galaxy's defense forces clashed with the enemy in a series of brutal battles. Planets that had once been peaceful were now transformed into desolate wastelands. Cities were reduced to rubble, and the cries of those caught in the crossfire echoed across the stars. But even as the war continued, Rylos knew the true cost of the conflict was becoming more apparent with each passing day. Despite the relentless barrage of enemy forces, the Galactic Council was determined to fight back, throwing every resource they had into the war effort. Fleets were being built at breakneck speeds, and new technologies were rushed into production to meet the ever-growing threat. Yet, even with all their might, victory seemed elusive. Every victory on the battlefield came with its own devastating cost. For every enemy ship that was destroyed, an entire colony might be wiped out in retaliation. As the war dragged on, the other species began to ask the same question. What was the point of winning if there was nothing left to protect? What was the cost of defending everything they held dear if it meant losing everything they had worked for in the process? Rylos found himself haunted by the question. Victory in battle meant nothing if the price was the destruction of everything they had fought to protect. He could no longer ignore the implications of the war. The human message, the one they had refused to heed at first, echoed louder in his mind every day. "We won't join the fight," the humans had said. "Not until you understand." They were right. They had known the truth all along, and now Rylos saw it clearly. Winning the war was not the real victory. The true battle would be what came afterward. The battle to rebuild, to restore what had been lost, to heal the wounds of a shattered galaxy. But the war was far from over, and the Council knew it. Despite the growing despair, they pushed on, each species fighting with every ounce of strength they had. The fear of what would happen if they didn't win weighed heavily on them. But as the battle raged on, the question remained, what would be left of their worlds after the war? Rylos stood on the bridge of the flagship, staring out at the battlefield. The enemy ships were still there, closing in from every direction. He could see the determination in the faces of the crew, but he could also see the fear. They had been fighting for so long, and yet the end seemed nowhere in sight. The enemy was relentless, their numbers seemingly endless. How long could they keep this up? The human ships, which had been absent from the battlefield for so long, were now appearing on the fringes of the war. Rylos had not expected this. The humans had refused to join the fight. Until now. As their ships appeared, the Council was puzzled. Had they changed their stance? Had they finally come to the aid of the galaxy? But as the humans made their presence known, their message came through loud and clear. "We're not here to fight your war. We're here to help you rebuild." It was a message of hope, a message that spoke of something beyond victory. The humans had understood the real fight all along. While the galaxy was focused on winning the war, the humans had been quietly preparing for the future, working on the difficult, necessary task of rebuilding what had been lost. Rylos was stunned. The humans had not joined the fight for dominance or victory. They had stayed out of the battle because they knew what the others had failed to see, that the true cost of war was not in the battles fought, but in the destruction that followed. They were not here to destroy. They were here to heal. The message from the humans was clear. War was not the answer. The true victory was in the healing that would come after the destruction had ended. The galaxy would not be saved by more fighting. It would be saved by rebuilding, by understanding that survival required more than just winning battles. It required learning from the mistakes of the past and coming together to rebuild what had been lost. Rylos finally understood. The humans had been right all along. The cost of war was far greater than anyone had anticipated. The battle was not over, but the future of the galaxy no longer depended on who won. It depended on how they rebuilt, how they healed, and how they moved forward. As the enemy ships slowly retreated, the Council members began to realize that the galaxy had been given a second chance. The war was not the end of everything. It was a beginning. The true fight now lay in the aftermath. Rylos looked out over the battlefield one last time, a sense of resolve filling him. The Council had a long road ahead of them, but with the humans' message in mind, he was determined to see it through. The true battle was just beginning, but this time, it would not be fought with weapons. The aftermath of the war left the galaxy in a state of utter devastation. Once bustling cities were now mere ruins, entire planets had been reduced to lifeless shells, and the once immense fleets of warships were now drifting wrecks in the void. The cost of the conflict had been unimaginable, and even as the last remnants of the enemy fleet disappeared into the vastness of space, a new, quieter battle had begun, the fight to rebuild. Rylos stood in the heart of the Galactic Council's new headquarters, a grand structure rising from the ruins of a once thriving metropolis. The damage caused by the war was still evident everywhere, but now there was a new sense of purpose in the air. The council was no longer just a group of representatives meeting to discuss military strategy. Now they had a singular focus: recovery. Human ships had landed in every corner of the galaxy. Rather than military vessels, they were filled with engineers, doctors, scientists, and workers, all eager to begin the slow, painstaking work of restoring what had been lost. The humans had been right all along, and Rylos could now see the depth of their understanding. They had not joined the war out of arrogance or pride. They had stayed away because they knew that what was truly needed was not more destruction, but a way to heal. "We were too focused on fighting," Rylos said, as he stood beside a group of other species leaders, watching as human engineers worked to restore a power plant that had once supplied energy to an entire sector. "While we fought to survive, we forgot what comes after the battle: the rebuilding, the healing. The future isn't won by war. It's built by understanding and cooperation." The council members stood in silence, watching the humans work. There was a sense of awe in the air as species from all over the galaxy witnessed the humans' commitment. They had come to help, not as conquerors or victors, but as partners. It was a humbling sight for Rylos and his colleagues, who had once looked down on humans as a primitive species, too short-sighted to understand the larger picture. But now, it was the humans who were teaching them all a valuable lesson. They had shown that the true strength of a species lay not in its ability to conquer, but in its ability to rebuild after devastation. The humans' approach was quiet, almost passive, yet filled with an undeniable strength. They were using their resources not to advance their own agendas, but to help those who had been harmed. They were teaching the galaxy the importance of compassion and cooperation in the face of unimaginable loss. Weeks passed, and the galaxy began to take notice of the changes. The immediate threats of war had faded, but the long-term challenge of recovery remained. The council began to work together, under the humans' guidance, to address the environmental destruction that had ravaged planets, the healthcare needs of countless species, and the deep psychological wounds that remained from the conflict. For the first time in many years, the leaders of the galaxy were working side by side, not as enemies or rivals, but as a united front. The humans had insisted on one important principle from the beginning: this was not a time for taking sides. Every species, no matter how powerful or insignificant they seemed, was part of the greater whole. The recovery efforts would not be about one group being given more resources than another, or one species having more influence over the others. It was a shared effort, and every species had a role to play. Rylos found himself questioning everything he had believed before the war. He had been so sure that survival depended on strength, on the ability to crush one's enemies and secure power at all costs. But now, as he looked at the galaxies slowly beginning to heal, he understood the humans' quiet wisdom. True strength came from cooperation, from unity, and from the shared will to rise above the ashes of destruction. As the weeks turned into months, the galaxy slowly began to change. Rebuilding efforts, although slow, were bringing hope to places once thought to be lost forever. The devastation was still raw, but a new sense of purpose was taking hold. Rylos and the other leaders began to see that peace was not just the absence of war. It was the active process of healing, of building, and of nurturing life after the storm had passed. One day, as Rylos walked through a newly restored city, he saw children who had never known peace, children who had been born into a galaxy torn apart by conflict. They were playing in the streets, their laughter echoing through the air. For the first time in a long while, Rylos felt a sense of hope. The children represented the future, the promise that this galaxy, once broken, could be whole again. The humans, with their quiet strength and their unyielding determination to rebuild, had shown the galaxy the true meaning of survival. It was not about winning wars. It was about surviving the aftermath. It was about finding a way to move forward, to heal, and to create a future where peace could thrive. Rylos took one last look at the bustling city, now full of life again. He knew that the journey ahead was still long, but the path was now clear. The humans had given the galaxy the greatest gift of all, a chance to start again. The price of victory had been steep, but the rewards would be worth it.